Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor and your host. What do you do when you find out your son has a terminal genetic condition? You set out to raise $2.2 million for your cure. This week's story is one of love, urgency, and the relentless pursuit of hope. Joe Jackson is the father of an almost 7-year-old William, a bright and joyful, really cute kid living with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. This is a rare and progressive genetic condition that weakens muscles over time. But what makes William's story different is what comes next. He might be the first child in the US to receive a CRISPR-based gene editing therapy for DMD. With the help of Cure Rare Disease, Joe and his wife Kati are racing to raise this $2.2 million to manufacture a custom therapy for William's specific genetic change, one that scientists say is especially suited to editing. In this episode, Joe and I explore what it's like to face DMD as a parent, how the promise of CRISPR is changing rare disease timelines, and what it takes to fund a cure when time is unfortunately not on your side. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. I am really honored that you are taking the time for how busy you and your family are right now to share your family's story with our audience. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm excited for the opportunity to talk about William and the potential treatments that we're working on.
Yeah, it is a very exciting time for people in the DMD community because there's been just so many updates. I want to go back to really where your journey was beginning, where you and your wife, Kati, received the diagnosis of Williams Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, or DMD as we'll probably refer to it. What was that experience like of receiving that, and maybe even just a little bit before, of when you started suspecting that something was different with William?
Yeah, we have a little bit of an interesting story, I think, that's different from a lot of families in terms of how we ended up with the diagnosis and what that journey was like. In our case, William, we didn't have any indication. He had no physical symptoms at the time that we were diagnosed. So when William was about a year old, so he was born in the summer, so we were planning our first kind of big trip since he'd been born. We were going to be in Europe for 10 days. And in the week or two leading up to that trip, William was kind of under the weather and not feeling great. And we were worried about being on an airplane for 16 hours with a sick 1-year-old. And so we just, made a pediatrician appointment and went down and got him checked out a little bit, make sure, there wasn't anything to be concerned about for the upcoming trip. And so they did some blood work on him and kind of checked him out. And there was there were basically some high test results. In particular, his CK level came back a little high. And at that time, our pediatrician, who, what a blessing it was to have her. She turned out to be a real hero and like a really awesome partner for us. She sort of flagged this as a high test result, but said, there's nothing to be concerned about for this trip, so go ahead and go. So we left for the trip, and didn't think too much of it. And a few months later, our pediatrician had circled back and said, hey, I'd like to follow up on those high test results. And so we went back in for more blood work. Again, it was about 6 months later. William was about 18 months old and quickly went from, hey, let's get this checked out to, oh man, like something serious is going on. And so it was honestly kind of a fluke that we found out when we did. As I said, a lot of families, when they get diagnosed, have a really difficult road to a final diagnosis. And, kids are missing milestones, or maybe they're 3 or 4 years old and they're playing, little kids soccer or something, and they're saying, boy, something doesn't seem quite right. And they have that challenging process of trying to figure out what's going on. And we kind of skipped that step, which was, I think, in retrospect now, really, really, like I said, a blessing, because it gave us the opportunity to start looking for treatment options, start getting resources, start understanding what we were dealing with, and doing so at an age where, William's symptoms hadn't developed and gotten more severe. So at the same time, though, it was just sort of like this curse. We were being told this absolutely devastating diagnosis. And we're sitting there with him and saying, well, he's fine. He doesn't have any symptoms. Like he's doing great. So that was extremely difficult to kind of wrap our heads around, like why, what's happening, why is this happening? And so that was really hard. Another thing that was challenging about it is this all happened in 2020, so like early spring of 2020, and I think we got sort of the phone call confirming that William had Duchenne about a week before the world shut down. And so the community aspect of, hey, let's, our friends, our family who all wanted to be supportive, everybody was quarantining at home, and there was all this uncertainty at that time about what was safe. And so that was sort of an added challenge to that. Of course, again, another sort of like silver lining to that was my wife and I were home. We were at home working from home. All the schedules were all flexible. So we got to be there with him and spend, basically months with him, which maybe was a little excessive, but it was like that was helpful for us to manage through that time, was to be there with him and present. And that was kind of our mantra in those early days when we first were.
That's so much to be going through. And like you were highlighting, that's not a typical diagnostic odyssey. It is in the sense of the CK or creatine kinase levels being elevated, and that's what then sets off into motion, like, let's explore what's happening here. That's oftentimes how Duchenne is coming up in a family and for an individual. But the fact that he was so young when you received that diagnosis, as you were saying, usually there's a couple physical signs that then leads someone, like maybe when they go from sitting on the floor to standing up, that process can look a little bit different because they're using their muscles differently in order to get up. A lot of times we also see now that a lot more people are doing carrier screening either before conception or during pregnancy. For a lot of people, it's coming up at that point because this is a inherited condition in the sense that people, people that are females are identified as a carrier for it, but a lot of times they're not. And we end up diagnosing it, in a kiddo first. And then throwing COVID in there, my goodness, like, yeah, not
Yeah,
having.
that was
Oh,
cherry on top. It did give us a little
yeah,
perspective during COVID, though, of kind of what's important and
right.
prioritizing our family and trying to keep things, things could be worse. Yeah, and to your point about a carrier status, I think those screenings are becoming more common. As you said, at that time, we didn't do any prenatal screening or anything like that. But my wife is not a carrier for Duchenne, and William was
Interesting.
it was a random sort of mutation at conception that led to his.
Which is, as I've been learning, as I always do through this show, it's more common than you would think in terms of like that random change. I
Right.
forget do you remember the breakdown at all? I don't remember.
I don't know the percentages off the top of my head.
I will throw
No.
that in the show notes, people. I've given myself homework here.
All right.
And William is turning 7 next week. So happy early birthday to William. He's a fellow Gemini like me. What is William's life like today? Has he started showing any symptoms of Duchenne? And maybe it's helpful because we've talked about like that diagnostic odyssey, but how does Duchenne affect boys like William? And how does he fit into what boxes maybe he's checked off at this point in terms of certain symptoms he's started to show?
Yeah. So as I said, when he was diagnosed, he was asymptomatic. And after the diagnosis, I would say, we probably had a full year before we saw anything. Of course, once we got this information, we started looking for it and we were kind of really aware. And, I would say, yeah, probably when he was about 3 was when we started to notice him. He wasn't really necessarily missing milestones yet, but we could see a difference, like you said, in the way that he moved. And, when he played with his friends, we go to the park and, you'd watch the kid go down the slide and then get up off the slide. And it was really obvious that William, struggled with that or needed to kind of engage his body in a different way in order to get up. And that was actually really helpful. My wife was good about documenting this, and it was a good way to kind of show people, because we had a lot of people in our community who said, I can read this, the description of what this condition is, but I don't quite understand. I saw him and he looked okay. He's walking around, and But when you do that side to side comparison of a healthy child and then William, you can see, he kind of struggles to get up, or there's the move they call the Gower maneuver, which is when they're getting up off the ground, and boys with Duchenne will push up with their hands on their knees to stand all the way up. And that started to kind of present. And so now, he's still, I think, for maybe an average Duchenne patient at age 7, I think he's doing well. And I would say we attribute a lot of that to the fact that we found out so early. And we have been really careful about, balancing and managing his physical activity and being thoughtful about that, which of course is a huge challenge, because now we're presented with, in every situation, how much do we let him go be a kid and play? How much do we say we can't do this because it's going to be damaging down the road? And there's a cost benefit in, it's really, really exhausting to have that kind of in your head all the time when you're watching, you just want to watch your son go play with his friends. And we're saying, oh, this 4-year-old birthday party is at the trampoline park, so I'm skipping that one. I think that knowledge and the ability to make thoughtful decisions about what is good for him, and also, get him on a treatment track that, proactively, so that he started a steroid regimen. Gosh, I think it was when he was 5. And so now he takes a daily steroid, which sort of helps maintain muscle function, and, other sort of nutritional, being thoughtful about his nutrition. And he has AFOs, so basically hard boots that he wears at night when he sleeps, that keep his feet at the right angle to not stress his calf muscles, which is an area that when they're little especially, is a muscle that gets used a lot. And so keeping that loose, kind of gives him the best ongoing function possible. So I think all those things have helped to kind of get him doing as well as he could given the circumstances. And so, yeah, he's a very happy, very bright, positive 7-year-old. He's very, very cute.
Very cute.
If
Yes, I'm
people have
going to
a chance to
second
see
that.
our videos and the pictures of him, he is kind of a charmer. And yeah, he overall is doing pretty well. He's at school. He participates in, school to a full degree. We limit his, time at PE. He goes goes to the library or goes to the computer lab, oftentimes when they're doing PE instead. So those kind of little day-to-day tweaks of his schedule, I think, have helped him as well. And then, of course, we have a great community. He's got his teacher is very plugged in on what's going on with him and kind of helps us keep an eye on him. And we keep him hydrated and try to keep him from overdoing it. And then, about 18 months ago, I would say, he has a electric wheelchair, bright orange. It kind of looks like a sports car. It's pretty cool. And as he is growing and as he's using his muscles and starting to lose some function, we've kind of been phasing it in and using it more. So he takes that to school, and he's not in it all day, but if there's classes going across the school to go to an assembly, he'll hop in it and drive across. And so or if we're going to the grocery store, we'll bring it, and so he can hop in it and drive around. It gives him some freedom and keeps him from overdoing it.
Conversations with him now that he's turning 7 and he has some of these differences in terms of not going to PE as often and now using a wheelchair in certain scenarios and sometimes skipping a certain party, like at a trampoline park where you're really using those calf muscles a lot and thigh muscles. How have conversations between you and Kati gone in terms of navigating and having him understand, okay, you're a little bit different in certain aspects and having it age appropriate? Because I imagine that's just so hard. And how much do you really want to explain to him at this point, and like what's appropriate and just in terms of his mental health? I can't imagine trying to frame that for him and having it be age appropriate.
Yeah. That's very difficult. I think like I said, he's a really bright kid, and kids are kind of intuitive, I think, sometimes about this kind of stuff. And he knows that his muscles work differently than his friends. And that's kind of how we oftentimes describe it. Everybody's different, and, your muscles work a little differently than your friends. And so we take these measures to, make sure that you're feeling good and able to, participate in the things that we can do. And he knows, he knows the term Duchenne. I don't know, recall exactly what age, but we've had, those kind of conversations, and kids are just so funny. It's like you could be having the heaviest conversation and explain that to them, and then they'll say, do spiders eat this? It's like moves on to the next thing. So it is very challenging, and it's going to continue to be so as he gets older. But sometimes I'm kind of surprised at the resilience and the positivity of kids, and he's kind of naturally happy. So we keep him, he knows that that's up, and he knows how to protect himself. It's really important that boys with Duchenne stay hydrated. And so, he's pretty on that. We kind of, not to get too into details, but we tell him, if you ever go to the bathroom and your pee is really dark, you need to come tell us. And he kind of knows that. So it's a challenge, but I think we're lucky to have a kid with the temperament that he has. And it's just kind of an ongoing process as all this is. And we kind of do the best we can each day.
And there's a lot of, I want to say, excitement towards this treatment, cure, figuring out the terminology. It depends on how that goes. But how did the process go in terms of starting to learn about, well, what is available for William and just DMD in general? Tell me how you connected with Rich Horgan, who was a guest about 5 years ago, back on episode 156, and talked about starting the Foundation Cure Rare Diseases in honor of his brother Terry that had DMD. So we'll throw the link in the show notes for people that want to listen to that. But how did you end up connecting with him? What did you learn from that? I mean, what were those early conversations like?
Yeah, I mean, we got this diagnosis, and I think the first action we took was we just you kind of mourn. It's like you got this news, this terrible things happening, and it's going to happen. And once we kind of got through that initial period and spent a lot of time with William and spent time together, we finally were able, after a month or so, say like, okay, it's time what can we learn about this? What are the next steps? And so, we started researching organizations. There's a variety of large national and international organizations that are specific to Duchenne or to muscular dystrophy as a disease group. And so we connected with them, and we connected with other parents in that capacity. And so some of those large organizations were really helpful resources in terms of how do we manage this? How do we think about it? How do we kind of carry on? But we pretty quickly recognized that those larger organizations weren't a great fit because William's mutation is so rare and is unique. And so the types of treatments that they're prioritizing, understandably so, are focusing toward the more common mutations that cause Duchenne. And so, I think there's a variety of deletions in the phase where, a large percentage, a much larger population of Duchenne patients have a similar mutation in those areas. And so they're working on sort of solutions and treatments that cater to, as many patients as possible and can help as many folks as possible. But it became pretty quickly clear that that wasn't actually going to apply to William. And so we started looking around then for a way that we could, work with an organization that might be able to help him specifically. And that's how we ended up connected with CRD through, my wife is a rock star and was researching like crazy and networking with folks. And we found Rich and Cure Rare Disease as a result of basically that search. And that really gave us some specific hope to say, hey, there's folks that are like trying to solve this puzzle for someone like William specifically. And there's people out there, really, really smart people that are working towards something that could help him and his specific situation. So and then we met with Rich, and we had we connected really well, and that kind of started us on our journey with them.
Yeah. And it really is so promising, the hope through CRISPR. We've explored that a lot. Even in the last week's episode, we were talking about it with another rare disease dad that, his son has a creatine transporter deficiency. And we were talking about the recent news just a week, 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, of the baby in Philadelphia that had a personalized CRISPR treatment, which is what we're looking at possibly for William. where the way I'm understanding it is that William has this very rare duplication in the DMD gene, and that CRISPR could basically take out that extra material. And that it's not just theoretical that rodent models with Williams' exact genetic change have been treated by CRISPR and they're showing promising clinical results. How have you felt just with how much this has progressed so quickly in terms of these rodent models? And then also with this recent news of the first personalized CRISPR treatment over here on the East Coast, like, is your mind just racing? Are you allowing yourself, and is Kati allowing herself to be excited by this? Like, share with me your mindset at this point.
I mean, it's undoubtedly incredibly exciting, and it's also intimidating, and it's by definition, this clinical trial is, you can't test on a population of people because the population of people is one. And so it's very, very promising. Like we said, we have, just incredible researchers. I actually got to go to Toronto where they have this mouse population and where they're doing a lot of this testing and meet the PhD students and the researchers that are working on it. It was so wonderful to put a face to these brilliant minds that are working on this stuff. And
wow, is that at Sick Kids in Toronto?
Yeah, it's Sick Kids in
Okay.
Toronto. Yeah,
Yep,
so we
makes
went out
sense.
there
They're
last
huge in
September,
Toronto.
and it was really cool. That was really, we got to go to the lab, and here are the machines that they use, and here's what they're looking at. And I don't understand any of it in detail, but it was very inspiring and provided a lot of hope to see that in person. It made it feel tangible, made it feel real. Yeah, I think it's intimidating and it's really exciting. So basically, we have been of the mindset that we were looking, a year or two farther out before we were expecting to get to this stage of there's a treatment that we are potentially ready to manufacture in the next, few months or in the next year. And so we got that sort of bombshell news, and it was, it got off this call, and I told Kati, I said, somehow this is like literally what we have been working for, and yet and this is like the best news that we could receive. It's so exciting, and at the same time, like I don't necessarily feel just universally excited. Like there's so many emotions wrapped up in that, but it is very, very exciting, and our community as well is thrilled, and they've jumped in with helping with fundraising. I mean, a big reason why it's so intimidating is because of the cost.
Yeah.
You and Rich had talked on the episode with him previously about how CRD is mostly funded by small donors. And that's been the case for us as we started our fundraising efforts too. It's been families that we know, and then our family and our community that's spread throughout the country. And then lots of donations from people that we've never met that heard our story and wanted to give or felt inspired and shared it. And so that has that's been hard to put into words how it's felt to feel kind of the groundswell of support that we've received over the last couple of months. And people are excited. So it's kind of the next step of the journey. And the fact that we have something to raise money for is something that we think about all the families with Duchenne over the last, decades and longer than that, who haven't had any hope in that way. So that we feel really lucky that we are in the situation that we live in. It's better to be a 7-year-old Duchenne patient in 2025 than it was in 1985. So there's some exciting things happening.
Yeah. And it is, like I said at the top, like you're looking to raise $2.2 million. Like this is a lot of money. And you've been doing so much. For people that are watching the video, you have your flag behind you. We row for William, and the organization is We Will for William. So tell me about raising this money so that he can then hopefully get this personalized CRISPR treatment. What are the biggest challenges of raising this money, and how have you been navigating that aspect? Because you look at that price tag and you're like, how could we ever raise that much money? And you're well on your way towards that $2.2 million already.
Yeah, it's been sort of incredible, but I think in some ways it kind of strangely was beneficial that this news came so quickly, because it was like we didn't have a year to stress out and dwell on it. It was like, it's go time now, and we just we didn't have time to think about it other than to just jump in and start taking action. And so I will tell you that we got this news. I set up a big Zoom call with a bunch of folks from our community and sort of gave them the nuts and bolts of what was going on and the fundraising number that we were looking at, and said, hey, we got to figure out how, what is our next step? What is our strategy here? And one of my close friends here in Oregon said, I think we should do something unique, something groundbreaking to reflect what William's journey is and what he's going through. And we here in Southern Oregon, we have the Rogue River flowing right through our valley, and my family and a lot of our community are whitewater rafters. That's like what we do in the summer. We get out on the river in our boats and run rapids and fish and camp and do all that stuff. And my close friend Jeremy said, what if we did this river trip in a way that nobody's ever done it before, and it can kind of mirror William's journey, and we can use it as a story and a way to, like, a catalyst for fundraising. And when he first proposed this idea, I think my wife said something like, oh, cool, yeah, we'll go, maybe my friends and I will go to a spa day to raise money for Duchenne. Because it was like, we're going to go do this thing that we like to do.
Those are different activities. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go do something that we like to do to raise money. But yeah, it really turned into this exciting fundraising project. And people really got behind it. So we ended up deciding we were going to row. The Rogue River flows just out of Central Oregon, and there's the Rogue River Dam all the way to the Pacific Ocean in Gold Beach, Oregon, is 157 miles. And that river, we run sections of it all the time. Like I said, it flows right through town here. So we float it. In fact, we're probably going to go tomorrow. It's supposed to be real hot, and go float the river for the day with the kids. And Jeremy said, what if we did it all in one go?
Like over 24 hours, not like
over 24 hours,
one trip. You're like, just not stopping. Paddle.
Right. So people do this trip. In fact, I have some friends that have done this whole length of trip years ago, and they did it in 10 days. And so we said, what if we did it? What if we did it without stopping? And
like through pitch dark night, like you can see clips of you. You're like, yep, we're just going.
It's dark. So I will preface it by saying we're pretty experienced rafters. I actually was a river guide way back in college. I have a bunch of friends that similarly are kind of really comfortable on the river. We know this river really well. And so as the plan was coming together, there was a lot of focus on that. How is this going to work logistically? What are the safety concerns? How do we make sure we're prepared? What are our contingency plans if something goes wrong? We, after some planning meetings, we said, I think we can do this. I think we're going to do it. So we had 2 boats. Myself and 7 other rowers, so 4 folks on a boat, and we pushed off at 7 in the morning. This was about a month ago, in the end of April. We pushed off at 7 in the morning on a Friday, and we rowed all day, we rowed all night, and we rowed half of the next day. It ended up being 31 hours from the dam to the ocean of sort of nonstop rowing, and we're rowing in shifts, and we're drinking cold brews the whole time, trying to stay awake. And it was really a thrilling experience. And the support that we saw from the community, I think it really connected here locally, because the river is such a big part of the community and everybody has a connection to it. And then I think for people that aren't local or who aren't familiar with whitewater rafting, it was sort of like, oh my God, like, wow, they couldn't quite imagine what that was like. And so I would encourage, you mentioned the organization. So We Row for William is our nonprofit, and We Row for William is what we called this trip. And if you go to werowforwilliam.org, or you can go to wewillforwilliam.org, it has all the details of this fundraiser. We just had a video that came out yesterday, I believe, that is a sort of like an 8-minute recap of the trip, and it's got all this footage of us running big rapids and what it looked like in the middle of the night when we're running the river, and a lot of details of kind of William's story and our background as well. So I would encourage people to go check that out. The video came up.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes to that. And you were saying, locally people were very involved. Not just locally, CNN covered this story. So let's give this trip the credit it deserves in terms of the attention that it got. I mean, that must have been a little scary to be like, oh, CNN, like, got to say the right thing, and you just know that you're getting this national, if not global, attention. Mm-hmm. Did you see an impact in terms of money, of like donations from that? What was that experience like? Because this was really recent, just a week or two ago?
I think the CNN story went live last weekend.
Yeah.
So it's all pretty new, and it went on all their social media channels. And I'll be honest, it's kind of like this has been such a whirlwind that it's kind of hard to have perspective on it yet. I think maybe give it a few months and I'll be able to wrap my head around it a little bit. But like I said, we got this news, and the timeline was short, and then the financial hurdle was so large that we just kind of jumped in, and that's kind of what it's been like, flying by the seat of our pants with this, and pulling it all together. That honestly, some of that has been really fun. I've never done this much media and that kind of stuff, and you kind of get desensitized to it quickly. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, CNN wants to do a Zoom call with you tomorrow. It's like, okay, I'll be there. Let's make it happen. Yeah.
Wow. And once you hit, I'm going to say when you do, not if. So when you hit 2.2 million and you're like, okay, we have the money, what is that next step then for William to get the treatment? Is it really just like book the first appointment? Is there a little bit more legwork that needs to happen for certain approvals? Yeah. Like, is there a rushed FDA approval? Like I believe we saw with the kiddo KJ in Philly.
Yeah. So, I mean, time is of the essence with this, because the truth is, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later as well, but how we define successful treatment with this, like the expectations, we still kind of don't know. Of course, with Duchenne, what we see in William is trouble getting up off the ground and general, weakness and getting tired throughout the day and those kind of symptoms. But the real concern is, the function of his heart and the function of his diaphragm and those things. And so in a big picture way, that's what we're really hoping to see outcomes from, and if William is in a wheelchair, but he has a long life and is capable of lots of things, that would of course be a wonderful outcome. And so we're kind of trying to manage those expectations, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about what we expect with that, because it's such a novel treatment. And so, yeah, I think when the money is raised, as you said, there will be sort of a planning process, probably of a few months, to set up the whole schedule. We'll be traveling, our whole family will be traveling to Virginia, where the treatment is going to be administered. And it'll look like, it's not as simple as, hey, we go in and get a treatment and then do some follow-ups. It'll be a full month ahead of time of quarantining, doing very baseline testing of things and making sure everything's looking good for treatment. So about 30 days out, and then he would go into the ICU as of day 0 and receive a treatment. That would be, an IV bag in the ICU. And then he'd probably spend about a week in the ICU for monitoring. And then after that, we'd stay there for follow-up testing. And, I think there's weekly check-ins for, 4 to 6 weeks after that, before it goes to monthly check-ins. And then eventually it would be part of just his normal checkups, biannual or annual checkups after that. So all in all, I mean, we're going to be uprooting our family for probably 3 months and living in an Airbnb and kind of, laying low and quarantining during that time, because certainly we, maximize the opportunity for successful treatment. And so we'll obviously be taking it really seriously during that time. So that's going to be disruptive. Hopefully we can do a lot of it during the summer so he doesn't miss too much school.
True.
But the timing is what it is, and preserving, I was going to say this earlier, but sort of preserving that, the sooner that we can do the treatment, as he uses his muscles, those muscle fibers, as they break down, get replaced by scar tissue and fatty tissue. And so the sooner we can intervene, the more of his muscles preserved, and we expect that will improve outcomes for him. So the time, and as it is with as I'm sure your audience knows, with science and medicine, that schedules have to be flexible because things change, and approval schedules and the timing of things is all complicated. So that is something that we know is out there, but right now we're kind of focused on the here and now, and we'll manage that when we get there. And luckily we'll get to be together as a family as we navigate.
Yeah, no, it is so thrilling that you're so close to be able to do this, and that there is so much hope in this. And as you said, we don't know exactly what that, when William gets this treatment, like, well, how will that look for him? But as you're highlighting, like, at first, when you think about like, oh, it's a muscle disorder, like, okay, we think of movement. But what we're really focused on for people that have DMD is the heart muscles and the muscles in the diaphragm to allow for breathing, because that's really, like singers talk about their diaphragm, right? So that's very important in terms of respiration. And so being able to maintain those muscles, I mean, would just be, just so important, as you said, that's really what the focus is long term. And it's just going to be really great to stay in contact with you, Joe, and just hear how everything is going. And I very much would love to have you back on the show, after treatment and, when things are settled, and be like, how is William doing? And, we're really rooting for you. And we're going to put a link in the show notes for people to donate towards this so that it happens even faster. But thank you so much, Joe, for just coming on and sharing so much, and that this is so big for William. But even beyond that, the DMD community, that, having William get this treatment and then having promising results, even for people that don't have his same exact genetic change of that exact duplication that he has, that it's still going to give very, very valuable data points for everybody in the DMD community and muscle dystrophies in general. So there's a lot to be gained for the entire community through this.
Absolutely. And, I'm, again, not the expert, scientifically speaking, but we kind of think about it as two development tracks for this treatment. One is the specific medicine that's treating William, and the other is the vector by which it's administered. And while this specific treatment is unique to William, the process, the method by which we're applying the treatment is something that would be applicable to people with rare diseases of many types. So even if I think there's a lot to be excited about, even for folks that obviously don't have his specific mutation, because it both paves the way in terms of the science of it, and also, if we can show efficacy, if we can show success, that opens up opportunities for more fundraising, for further research, for, as we know, insurance companies don't love the N of one populations, but if we see positive results, and then we find ways to trim costs and raise money, that can benefit everybody. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I like that you even brought it out to just rare diseases and other, that vector aspect is so important, because for other like blood conditions, like the first FDA approved treatment using CRISPR is for a blood condition called sickle cell. And we've had on Victoria Gray on the show that was the first person to receive that, and she's now asymptomatic. That's a little bit easier because you could take the bone marrow out, as I say, CRISPR it up and put it back in. You can't just take the heart and the diaphragm out and all muscles and change the genetics and CRISPR it up and then put it back in. So it certainly is more challenging. So figuring out how to deliver CRISPR in a safe but effective way, that's going to just be so important, and then so versatile for so many different conditions. So
yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Duchenne is kind of one of the most challenging for that treatment aspect. Like if you look at this recent child that was treated for the liver condition, we can have a really targeted treatment that targets a specific part of the body. And in this case, well, your entire body is filled with muscle and skeletal muscle, and so you're trying to figure out how do we administer it and spread it to the body and have the positive impact without too much, or without having an immune response that's problematic, and those kind of things. So I think in a lot of ways, this is a really big mountain for this type of genetic therapy. And if we're able to show success, I mean, I think it'll be a really, really promising test case for a lot of other people.
I agree. And we'll just have to, I'm not even offering it. I'm like, you will come back on to share how everything is going. So
I would love to.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.